Was rubber the connection?
The connection was wood. So you're supposed to find, in this particular chain, you're supposed to find what connects these two things in terms of medium. And the way you find that essentially is you read the wall label.
I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from Artnet News. Welcome back to our monthly edition of the Art Angle Roundup, where we parse some of the biggest headlines that have been taking place around the world. And we're speaking in January, so this is our first one of the year. And I'm excited to be joined, as always, by my co-host, Ben Davis. Hey, Ben.
Hello, Kate.
Hi. And we have a guest with us this time around, our very precious colleague, Caroline Goldstein, who is our acting managing editor and a very key part of our team at Artnet. So thank you for coming on the Art Angle.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be on this side of the mic.
Totally. Yes. Caroline, you've been listening in and feeding into the podcast from the back room for a long time. So it's really nice to have you on stage with us, so to speak. Yeah, it's been quite the January, I must say. There's some interesting stories that have transpired. We'll be talking about censorship in museum world, and we will talk about the passing of David Lynch, which took place at the top of this year, a famous filmmaker, but more notably a famous artist, really. So we're going to talk about his artistic legacy in particular. And then we're going to speak about a video game that I hope you both played over the weekend. The Met has launched a video game on Web3. And so I'm curious to hear your guys' evaluations of that. But first, I'd love to know, everyone's back from holidays. The world is weird and stressful, but I'm sure you've also seen some beautiful things. Like, have you been going out to museums lately, or what have you been up to? Caroline, do you want to start?
Yeah, so probably the best thing that I've seen recently, I was home in DC visiting family, and I went to the relatively new Rubel Museum. It's in Southwest DC. It's on the site of what was an elementary school, and now it's like a very kind of modern, high-ceiling, poured concrete space that's very cool. And they have a show that's sort of like a survey of like America, and so a lot of kind of the symbols and satire. And probably my favorite part was there was an entire gallery that was just this like 100-foot long woodcut series by Kerry James Marshall that wrapped around the entire gallery. I think 3 walls of the gallery. And then on the 4th wall, there was the study for it. So you could see sort of like the planning and then the execution. And it was just like, it was pretty awesome. And it's nice because, the Rubels are such great art patrons and philanthropists. And so like they have the space to put on something like that, which, very few museums, certainly private museums. So yeah, that was awesome.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, probably worth the trip all by itself. Kerry James Marshall, probably one of the best artists working now.
Yeah. Highly recommend.
What does it depict?
It's a kind of a classic Kerry James Marshall. So it's a domestic interior, like pretty intimate, but really just like normal people going about their day. But it's a woodcut, which is cool because I don't really think of that as being part of
Yeah, he's better known as a painter. Yeah,
so highly recommend. It's a free museum for DC residents, so get out there. And it's on view for, I should double check, but another couple of months at least.
Yeah, it says till fall 2025, so maybe there'll be chance. Yeah, these pillars like symbols, society, and satire are so amazing somehow. Ben, what have you been up to?
Oh, puttering around. It's been really cold in New York, so hard to convince yourself to leave the house. But I try. The thing that sticks in my head is I went to the Brooklyn Academy of Music. They have an AI art film festival called Techni, and still trying to see what's going to happen in that sphere. So I went to see a work called The Golden Key by Mark DaCosta and Matthew Niederhauser, which is this kind of infinitely regenerating fairy tale film. It's trained on folk tales from around the world, and then you come in and you kind of watch it like a film on 3 screens, and it has 3 simultaneous projections of fairy tale images in a kind of a storybook style that illustrate what you're hearing. And then 2 terminals where anybody in the audience can stand up and type in any kind of word, any kind of thought, any kind of theme. And it will just, these voices narrating folk tales will continuously just weave in whatever you type into what you're hearing and seeing. So,
does it make you optimistic for the forum?
Well, goodness. I mean, the thing that I thought about it is I thought it was pretty entertaining, or I guess I'd say pretty amusing. And I left thinking, man, that would have blown me away 2 years ago. And now it's kind of like, yeah, a little bit. I mean, to me, it just highlighted that there's a huge challenge in this field is that the technology itself does so much of the work that, like, it doesn't surprise me. It's not wondrous to me that this is possible. And the fairy tales are just sort of feel a little bit random, and I kind of can see the glitches in the art and see how they don't correspond, how they're kind of random. I see where it breaks down because I'm not so impressed or overawed by the technology. And it ends up being kind of an amusement where, you know, you keep trying to break it, you know, putting in something that is silly, and you're almost disappointed when you can't, because you just can't get it to break out and do something really interesting. You know, I kept trying to put in a character doing a wacky accent, you know, like a Southern lawyer shows up and says, you know, shut my mouth, and to see if I could get the kind of British narrator to break its accent, and it just defeated me every time. It never.
Is that a failure for you or a success for the program?
A good question. I guess there is the question that is asked, the artistic question that these kind of experiences ask. Kate, what about you?
Well, I was in Canada in December, and I got to see the exhibition that's going to the MoMA in April, Woven Histories, this textile and modern abstraction exhibition.
Right, we talked about that on our textiles podcast last year.
Yeah, exactly. And it has been textile art has come to the fore both from like a market perspective, but also institutionally. And it's also become maybe in a negative sense, like a flashpoint in some of these discussions, you know, around like identity politics in the museum world. Problematically, it kind of becomes like a punching bag as a medium or something. And so I think it was really exciting to see this show, which had like 130 artworks in it. It was so sumptuous and visually splendid. And the variety of textile techniques, like when you think about textile art, obviously like a certain kind of work comes to mind. And then just walking through the show and realizing just like the vastness of this medium and what it can do. It was just a really impressive exhibition. And it says so much about modern art in so many different ways. So I was really excited about it. And I would encourage you to go to it in April.
It's called Textiles and Modern Abstraction, is that right? Did it contextualize the textiles against abstract painting and abstract sculpture, or was it just textiles?
Yeah, no, it was just dedicated to textile art, and it was more than full with just that medium and focus. So let's get to our news stories. I think that we will start with, the story of the hour, which is, you know, the political shifts that have been taking place as it pertains to museums. So Caroline, you had been editing some of these stories. Maybe you want to take that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's no surprise to anyone that censorship is kind of a big flashpoint in the art world right now and in the world at large, but also, you know, when it pertains to us in the art world. And I don't know how it's still January. This month has been going on forever. But so a bunch of these stories just came out at the very beginning. The first kind of instance was at the Museum of Modern Art in Fort Worth, Texas, where there was a group show of artworks that was called Diaries of Home. And included in that show was work by the photographer Sally Mann, who is a really well-known, well-regarded, at one point, Time magazine's Photographer of the Year artist. And 4 photographs of hers featured in the show were of her young children in various states of undress. And I think in maybe 3 of them fully nude, when they were minors, like really little kids. And essentially, it was reported by this outlet called the Dallas Express, where apparently visitors were distressed and flagged potential child pornography in this show. And so then a bunch of local politicians, there was a county judge, and the local Republican Party chairman called for an investigation, and a search warrant was executed, and the images were actually removed from the show. This is not the first time that Sally Mann's work has come under fire and has been sort of like in this sphere of censorship. She sort of turned towards photographing her young children on the late side of her career, and it really took off. But of course, there's been a lot of, kind of backlash. I will note that I looked at the price database, and all of her top-selling works at auction do feature these kind of controversial images of her children, mostly like frolicking. She has this big farm in Virginia, so they're kind of just frolicking around being little kids. But, there's this kind of question about if this constitutes child pornography. Is this obscenity? And I don't know if you guys remember, this is very reminiscent of, sort of the culture wars from the 80s and 90s with Robert Mapplethorpe and the Sensation Show in Brooklyn. I don't know if you guys have thoughts about, this feels like an echo of those culture war times, but obviously it's, decades later.
Well, what I would say about this is two things. One is that these have always been controversial works, and specifically two of the ones that were seized, which is The Perfect Tomato, which depicts her little daughter dancing, and Popsicle Drips, which depicts sort of the nude torso. And it's a full frontal nudity of her young male child. They come up again, these specific works. In the culture wars time, these were controversial works. And actually, just a couple years ago, Sally Mann actually, for the New York Times, wrote like a big, long essay looking back at that controversy, because actually the New York Times at that time led some of the controversy against her, and reflecting on how critics treated it then and things she would have done differently, and how she thinks about the work. I mean, kind of what's intense about the works is that they do have some ambiguity. Not that they are pornographic, but that they're about the kind of ambiguity of childhood, that children aren't just little cherubs, that's what she always talks about, but are demons and are difficult, and that a mother has a very intense relationship to her children. And you see that in the photos, and they've always, pricked people the wrong way. But then if you read the Dallas Express article that kicked this all off, the Dallas Express is a historically Black-owned paper that has been taken over by a conservative donor as a sort of a political instrument. Yeah. And it's like fishing for controversy. My impression is that there wasn't actually much of a controversy until the paper went fishing for it, proactively found these controversial works, and then started asking Republican officials about it, who started speaking out about it, and local Christian groups to try and activate them, and that they found it a useful thing. The idea of attacking museums as immoral repositories of immoral thoughts is pretty old. And it's not just the Sally Mann images that they get upset about. It's specifically that they're in these images of children are near images that features queer and LGBT imagery. They are very specific about that. They talk about how seeing this, and then in the next room, there's a video about a lesbian couple talking about having kids. And that seems to be what offends them. There's a lot of not very hidden kind of homophobia in the mix here.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear how they're the most in-demand works, because as Sally Mann said in that 2015 New York Times article, they make up only a small fraction of her practice. I think she said less than a quarter or something. Yeah, and that ambiguity point is a really important one. I think in a way it's how these images circulate that is sort of part of the artwork as well. And I think that's what makes her work really provocative. In that piece for the New York Times, she was talking about how the Washington Post, when they printed this work of her daughter, they actually censored out her eyes, her chest, and around her pelvis. And it kind of in a way, well, as Sally Mann was arguing, that actually rendered the image more obscene than it would have been. It pushes it out of a neutral space. So
yeah, she talks about how that was what made her daughter ashamed.
Upset,
It was that the Wall Street Journal had to write her 6-year-old daughter an apology letter.
This really coincides with the news of this report that came from PEN America and the Association of Art Museum Directors and the Artists at Risk Connection, which was just surveying museums in the U.S. about kind of fears of censorship. They cited this case as one instance of censorship of kind of the inflammatory nature right now in museums. But the thing that I wonder is, like, every time in recent past, one of these big cases has actually gone to court for charges of obscenity, the museum has won. So it really seems like this is just like stirring the pot, getting press. There's really no precedent for this to change anything. But then the flip side is, if this comes down to funding, I think that's where it could be a real issue.
I mean, the Dallas Express was proactively asking donors of the show, why are you supporting child pornography?
Yeah.
And donors to the museum were distancing themselves. I mean, I think there's a real offensive here. I mean, it may be unprecedented, but we live in unprecedented times. I think to a certain extent, these institutions are on their back foot in the political climate. People should read that report, or we have an article on the site about that report, the Censorship Horizon, I think it's called. Because one of the things it points out is that most museums don't have any policy of how to deal with a censorship controversy when there are calls for censorship, which there have been a lot of in the recent past. You really just read this coverage of this report on censorship and think, oh yeah, this is going to be the next 4 years is going to be about this. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that actually changing policy is the point. I think the point is to mobilize people and to kind of like sharpen the sense of like a culture war, which has been very successful politics in the recent past. The environment's very inflamed right now.
Well, it'll be interesting to follow this story. I'm sure there's going to be more to come from this. But we should talk about David Lynch, the formidably talented artist, filmmaker, musician. He died in January this year at the age of 78. Such a huge influence on many artists, and also had an incredible amount of influential artists that he was working from in his work. So it's going to be an interesting one to talk about. Ben, do you want to talk about David Lynch? Because you met him, I think, right?
I did an interview with him some years ago when he had an art show at Jack Tilton. This is kind of my idea to do. He's a filmmaker, or best known as a filmmaker. But I also just thought it was a rare opportunity to talk about someone who had this towering status in pop culture, obviously meant a lot to people, but also a lot of what makes him great is the way that he fits into the art sphere. And he maintained an art career his entire life in parallel to his film work. As a matter of fact, as it became harder and harder to fund the kind of experimental films that he was known for, he did a lot of art shows. You know, the last decades when he wasn't really, post Inland Empire, when he wasn't making a lot of films, he did a lot of art shows and other experimental stuff. And he got his start as an art student. Way back in the late 60s, he studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He always said, Philadelphia is my biggest influence. Like studying in Philadelphia, felt so covered in grime. Were you aware of his art making? What did he mean to you?
Well, I just wanted to start off by saying, before he went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, he did a stint at the Corcoran College of Art and Design. Shout out to my alma mater, even though he apparently left there feeling very unfulfilled and then made his way to Philadelphia. I guess DC just wasn't quite gritty enough for him. I was reading about him speaking about his artwork, and he talked about sort of like films as moving paintings, which I think that, when you look at his work, I almost wish that like you could see them in motion, because it does seem to me like a lot of his works would translate better into film in some way. They just don't seem enough. Like I want them to do more for me, because...
You mean his paintings?
Yeah, his paintings, sorry.
Okay.
And like they just don't seem as fully formed, which I think makes sense that if you can do both of those things, which is not to say that I don't like them.
Right now, I've been thinking about his work as on the whole. So I think I was looking at that show. He did a show in 2007 at the Fondation Cartier, and there was such a nice overlap with the way he had set up the show with these heavy curtains and this kind of maze-like setup at installation that, like, of course, like mirrored scenes in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks. So in a way, I hadn't had the chance to kind of like detangle them yet. I think they are good, though. And I think, this kind of current of surrealism that he's always been interested in every aspect is very pungent. I mean, for me, to answer your question, like, I think that David Lynch might have been my gateway in a way to art, which is quite a huge claim. But, on the note of like seeing something that was completely unresolved, like I remember being in film class and just like my professor at the time, David Nichols, like putting on Blue Velvet and being like, respond. And I feel like that was, I didn't go to art school, but that was kind of like, and there was no right answer, no wrong answer. And the movie had no clear like narrative in a way that you could sort of like respond to in a clinical sense. And that was my first encounter with that feeling, I think.
Well, so here's the thing, Caroline. So a lot of people have this feeling about his painting because people have such a strong relationship to his films. They wish that he was making films, basically. The paintings are these often kind of cartoony, kind of like scary cartoons is the vibe I would say. His origin as a filmmaker is he was looking at a painting he was working on, and he describes seeing a wind come out of it and then thinking, how would it make a painting that moves? And then that led him to making his first film, which is 6 men getting sick 6 times from 1967. People can look it up. It's these screaming faces, vomiting. It's very inspired by Francis Bacon. You know, I think that you could do worse as understanding his films than going to see some works by Francis Bacon in the nearest museum that has them, you know, these kind of sense of these horrible specters and images coming at you. When his Twin Peaks: The Return came out a few years ago, I even did an article where I compared images from it to Bacon images, you know, because there's like a monster that comes out of a box in that. And there are literally Francis Bacon paintings of these specters like haunting these like box-like forms. So the thing is, the films came out of the paintings as paintings that move, but I think you can talk about the reverse in that the films are best understood as like a series of images that appear and can't be interpreted and don't really connect, you know? I think that's really a key to understanding them, is that he thinks in terms of these like individual great moments.
Yeah, that's what I was meaning about their kind of like not being resolved and kind of working against interpretation. Did you guys ever watch his weather reports? Because I feel like that's the secret foundation stone to understanding David Lynch, because he did these like every day for a period of time up until 2022, where he just was sitting in his studio and like looked out the window and gave like a 30-second report of the weather. And it captures this like making the mundane like profoundly odd.
Yeah.
Which I feel like that is his kind of Lynchian signature, you know? And then every once in a while he'd throw in some kind of statement.
Absolutely. And you know, the thing about the weather reports, though, is think about that first origin story. He looked at a painting and he saw a wind come out of it. You know, I think there's something about the weather, just manifestations coming at you, you know, these vast forces that you can't control. That's why I think the weather was interesting to him. I did interview him, and I guess it was the most memorable interview I've ever done, even though it was a terrible interview. I think the headline is a torturous interview with David Lynch. It was a really weird interview. Everyone noted that, because I just think about it a lot, and I reference it a lot in lectures I give, because, you know, when you're writing about art, you're trying to interpret it, or you're trying to come up with meaning. And a lot of artists hate being asked about the meaning of their work because they're like, don't try and like pin me down, you know? That's definitely how David Lynch was. He was just really hostile to meaning. But sometimes with certain kinds of artists, I feel like, come on, man, I'm trying to help you out. You know, I'm trying to like tell a story that makes people interested in your work. And with David Lynch, he would just challenge every question that you asked him. He said like, oh, so there's kind of a gothic feeling here. And you'd be like, gothic? No, there's no gothic here. What is gothic? What does that mean to you? You guys did turning it back around on you. I've thought about it a long time because I think there's something really interesting in this paradox. His work was so meaningful to people, but at the same time, it's not about something that you interpret. You know, everybody interprets it in their own way. It's about opening up the space for everybody to have like their own experiences with it and holding those things in tension. The sense that something is meaningful, that you can't look away, and the sense that it can't be pinned down. I think that's the key to a lot of his things. And I've thought about talking to him ever since.
Yeah, it's like something about establishing mood. Like I think Lynchian is almost like it's like a mood, and it's hard to pin that down, what that is.
But you know exactly what you mean when someone says that.
Yeah.
Like what it means to you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's represented by Pace now. And so I'm sure, you know, posthumously there will be some excellent, hopefully, exhibitions around the world that will, you know, bring together his filmmaking and his art in meaningful ways now. So moving on to our last segment, you guys had homework. It was to play the Met's new video game, which is on scare quotes, Web3.
And we have not talked about this. We agreed to play it each and then come back and say what we thought.
We're going into this blind, but just to give people who haven't had the chance to play this quote unquote video game, the Met has launched this form of sort of edutainment, if you will. They've launched this platform that is a game platform that launches a new game every week, and you can collect tokens that you can have in your wallet on OpenSea. So it is on the blockchain, and they have done it together with TR Labs, which is a new company that is working on bringing, you know, blockchain technologies and artworks together. So The game takes about 5 minutes to play, and you kind of are building these chains of connection between diverse artworks at the Met. Does that do it justice?
Yeah. I think that tracks. Yeah.
Like
Okay.
it gives you a series of artworks, and you're supposed to find out what links them. And then every week on Thursday, they're releasing a new chain that you have to kind of solve the riddle of what connects these artworks.
So I lost.
What?
Okay, the answers are there. Did I just cheat the whole way through? Because if there's a
I
little
did not get a
I-
badge. And I still don't know the answer to one of them. So what's your review, Ben?
What is this? What is this? Why is this?
I have so many
That's my
questions.
question about it. Like, who is this for? Like, is it for kids? And it's for kids you're trying to get onto the
Get on the
blockchain? Is it?
You need a
Like
wallet
you
and
finish,
everything.
and then you finish it, then you have to set up a wallet in order to like get an NFT badge for reasons I don't know. Possibly for future resale. Like I'm just totally confused by what this is.
You can get, if you collect enough badges, I think you get little perks from the museum. Like maybe you'll get a museum catalog or something like that.
Which I have to say, the perks that they listed were very cool. I mean, like a private tour with a curator, or like, I don't know, stuff from the store, like on super discount. But I don't know, first of all, how many badges you need to get to accumulate to get one of those prizes.
Yeah, so we should just clarify. So what it is it'll show you two works of art. Not to give anything away, but for the first two in this initial chain, it's a sculpture by Hugh Hayden called Chosen, which are these carved skeletons, and then Shekiah Booker's Raw Attraction, which is this rubber kind of abstract sculpture with like
Was
lots
rubber
of...
the connection?
The connection was
should
wood.
ask.
So you're supposed to find, in this particular chain, you're supposed to find what connects these two things in terms of medium. And the way you find that essentially is you read the wall label.
Well, this is my thing, because so you have
click
it's like
on a button
multiple
that tells you the wall
choice.
label.
They give you like an option. So I think it was like, you know, wood, steel, or like ivory or something. But yeah, the information about the materials is there if you click on it. And if you just read the materials, then you can figure out which one has the same thing.
Which is why you guys are laughing at me for having lost.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean,
More or
maybe you
less.
did it the right way because you didn't click on that. But also, like,
No.
yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, the theme of this first one is, I don't know, unexpected materials or something like that. They have different, there are going to be 4 different themes, and future themes include emoji, which will focus on symbols in art, and then Web3, which will focus on the history of art viewed through the blockchain, looking at artworks that used ideas of trust and a ledger. Why is the Met doing this?
I think we should get into the backstory in a second, but quickly, Caroline, did you have fun playing this game?
I mean, fun is not the word that I would use. No. Like, did I learn something? Maybe. But like, I really was just trying to solve it. So I wasn't paying that much attention to the artworks. I was just trying to like, you know, find the connection.
Yeah, there's something very like pedagogical, not in a fun way about this game. But I think what's interesting was to look at the backstory of why it came to be, to come back to what you were saying, Ben. So this tech company that's headquartered in New York, TR Lab, is headed by the deputy chairman of Christie's, Ghislaine Cohen, who is a very important contemporary art specialist who has developed a reputation at Christie's as a quote unquote secret weapon for helping them rake in hundreds of millions in Asia. And then the other person who's co-founded this company is Audrey Wu. Her family has founded the Rockbund Art Museum in Shanghai in 2010. So I think there's some serious power brokers that are behind this project. And with TR Lab, they've also done a project with Rockbund Art Museum. They made a series of unrealized works with Chris Burden and a collaboration with the Calder Foundation.
NFTs, to be clear.
Yes, sorry. And this is all like Web3 blockchain collaborations.
Yeah, it was founded right after the sale of Beeple's Everydays, you know, in the moment when everybody was hyped on NFTs, which has passed now. So the kind of interesting thing about this is that the moment has moved on from when people were buying unique digital art on the blockchain, and now what's going on in crypto art is totally different. But clearly there's some kind of calculation by museums that this is an opening to, I don't know, maybe younger people who are interested in crypto or trying to get sort of tech signal to techie people that the Met is open to crypto, because the crypto element is like, why this needs to be on the blockchain is a little bit escapes me.
It didn't even feel that like seamless a technology. Like it was a drag and drop kind of, I don't know, it didn't feel particularly impressive in a tech capacity. So yeah, and why is it on the blockchain? Like I don't understand.
I looked at OpenSea, and there are 770 owners of Met ArtLinks badges, including both of you guys if you opened wallets. I don't know. But it struck me as like an okay number, but not like, I'm not sure what the like KPI of this project is, but it's not like huge. So we'll see what they'll do with it. But the Met has also tried this before, right? They had a project with Roblox, which is a metaversal video game that's sort of open source. So they're clearly trying to reach younger audiences. And this is maybe also like a refined digital first audience in the case of TR Lab.
Can I tell you what I think my idea for an art video game is?
Please, Ben.
I think it's obvious. We know because we cover the news. What do people like to read about? They either like to read about heists or artworks getting destroyed. So basically, first-person shooter in the museum, either where you get to destroy everything or a heist game. That's what museums should be putting out.
If you could be the person going to steal something from the museum, that could be cool.
Yeah, just plan a heist. That's awesome. Awesome idea.
Someone made a video game that was like how to navigate an art opening. And that was also like, that could be something, you know?
We could just get it on the blockchain, then maybe we can get it funded.
Some great ideas here. Yeah. And I could maybe have a chance at winning. So yeah, this has been fun. We should wrap it. And I'm going to check in with you guys and see if you got your badges this week. Thanks a lot for coming on, Caroline. It was a joy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And see you soon, Ben.
Always a pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Carolyn Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thank you for listening and see you next week.